and still, I don't even still know if they're around, but Homestead Design was actually owned by an architect. John Hausner was an architect, and you can tell their developments look a lot better than some of the others.
I rest my case. I'm not.
I think Snyder Braverman does hire architects. They definitely hire architects for their multifamily buildings. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be an architect to design a highly efficient building. Just look at the buildings that get Efficiency Vermont awards every year. A lot of them are not particularly attractive, but they're really efficient. So, you know, it's like talking to any one architect. I'll tell you, in the architecture field, and I'm an AIA member, it's kind of trying to get a bunch of architects to agree on anything is kind of like herding cats. And everybody always says that no two architects ever agree on anything. But just you know, I mean, just today, and yesterday, the Residential Building Energy Standards second review meeting was held with Energy Futures Group, and architects, two of us, Sandy Vitsoon and myself, we both weighed in quite a bit on those standards, and particularly issues that would relate to verification of compliance, which that seems to be the really big issue right now. And so I think that is an area where we should be doing more work. And I think Andrew and Ethan have been talking with Burlington. Apparently Montpelier probably is a better model for what we want to do, because we don't have any of the resources that Burlington has at our avail. But Montpelier is in a fairly similar situation to us, except they already have a residential standard.
We're getting a bit off the subject here, Donna. All I'm asking.
I just want to fill this. I just want to fill you in on this, because this last part is not off subject. It's very much on subject in terms of implementing some enforcement of the residential energy code. That is absolutely part of what we need to ensure.
Yeah, my question was much simpler and broader than that. Whether it would be, speaking for myself, it would be very interesting to hear from somebody like him for 10 or 15 minutes about, you know, energy efficient design, architect by an architect. That's all my question was. And so make time for it at a future meeting if people think it's worthwhile. I do.
So, and I'm sure there's some value in getting some additional viewpoints in, but to Andrew's question, Melanie, can you maybe help us conceptualize the work that's going to happen under the implementation plan development portion of this project? Because if I'm remembering correctly, it's both transportation and buildings that are budgeted to get an implementation plan.
Sure. So you're correct. The transportation sector is the first sector that's going to be kicked off for implementation. We already have a consultant on retainer for that work. That's VHB. The second sector is intended to be government operations, because South Burlington was awarded a municipal planning grant to do that work. And then subsequent to that, for buildings and thermal, I am unaware of the timing and schedule and way in which the implementation plan would get done for that piece of the implementation process. I think that would be a question for Paul once he's back.
Okay.
Would you say again, what was the first one that will?
Transportation sector.
Oh, transportation. There's a consultant for that, correct?
Correct. Yes, we have VHB on retainer to do that work. And do you have anything to add, She's the lead on that project.
No, I've been in touch with VHB and they know that this is gonna happen next fiscal year, which starts in July. So yeah, we're just kind of waiting to hear from Paul when the city wants to kick that off.
I'm sorry, could you tell me again the name of that organization? Not just
VHB.
VHB. I think they just go by the acronym these days, but it's Van Huysen. I forget what the B stands for.
Oh, V as in Victor HC.
V as in
V as
Victor.
in Burlington HC. What is it?
V as in Victor. H as in house, and B
Okay.
as in Burlington.
Ah,
VHB. Yes.
thank you.
They do a lot of transportation planning work in Chittenden County for the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, have worked in South Burlington. So they're doing a sustainability climate action plan oriented project for the airport. So they're very well suited for this next phase of the project.
Roseanne brings up a good question. We should call the meeting to order before we get too much further into the details here. So let's officially kick off. I think it would be useful to maybe come back to the question about implementation plans and funding, if we have some time to talk about the ARPA funds and whether the task force wants to submit any recommendations to the council about funding priorities for that, because that might help to close some of the gaps that we've had from this first phase. But maybe we can talk about that in the agenda section. Michael, did you have something you wanted to bring up before we jump
Yeah,
into?
I wanted to say that I'm sorry I had hijacked the beginning of this meeting, but I tried to do it before we started. So I'm abandoning that subject for now.
I think it's a good question that you raised, though. So let's try to tackle it at a time when we can get everyone on board to talk about it. I think it's always helpful to have experts available. So I don't know that there's too much in the way of emergency review. Any members of the public there in City Hall today? It's muted in that room, so I can't.
No, there's nobody here.
Okay. Sorry, we left you all alone, but okay. So speaking of the agenda, any additions, deletions, change in order? Anyone wants to bring up?
Yeah, really importantly, I'm wondering if we have an answer to the question we posed at the last meeting with respect to the authority to pass the ordinance that Burlington passed.
I can respond to that. I did remind Paul of that you had directed him to speak to the city attorney and to also find out the steps involved with charter change. And he is looking into that, and we'll have information for you at the June meeting, for the next meeting.
Yeah, Srini.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether it was covered in the last two meetings. Do we have a timeline for completing the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and prioritizing the major areas of focus? I think Melanie mentioned government operations as a priority based on funding. I'm just curious, where does that fit in the overall priority for greenhouse emissions reduction? So just more on the timeline of when do we plan to complete those?
Yeah, I can respond to that. So the year 2019 base inventory has been developed, and it informed the forecasting and planning of the science-based target presentation that we saw I guess that was 2 or 3 meetings ago, and we'll see another iteration of the science-based targets and what the inventory looks like at the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other extra agenda items? Any questions anyone else has?
It's not a question, but I did follow up with the superintendent of schools, and it's really hard to nail this down to, but they really do have some plans in place. And I keep asking that it would be really helpful for them to share that with this committee. I think I suggested, Ethan, that he get in touch with you and or Paul. So I keep prodding, and I think they just have so much on their plate that this is not all that high, but I did remind school leadership that these are goals for the city. They're part of the city, and they really need to be engaged and share with us what they can do and the education. I mean, they're always, David is always very interested in, oh, we could get students and classes and stuff, and then, nothing happens. So I keep prodding. I don't know who else to speak to. Maybe Pat Burke, I can call him.
Maybe we need to give them a deadline and set up a time for them to present to us or something like that, so that they have a focus to put it up for list.
Yes, I think that would be helpful. So at least we know what they're doing.
I'm reminded, Paul usually takes the minutes, and is someone on?
I am taking the minutes, Ethan, as best I can, being
Okay.
unfamiliar with your work agenda. I'm just sort of, it's going to be a very broad brush reporting.
I wanted to make sure that was something that you were willing to take on, and I definitely appreciate your support with that. Okay. So I guess, Helen, just in terms of the next steps with that, maybe that's just a question to us about how we can invite them to give us more feedback if it's not going to be some kind of written report that they send over about what they're planning to do, which might be also making it harder for them if we were expecting them to write it all up in an easy to digest fashion, though it would be way easier if they just sent us over a little memo.
Come to a meeting, just come to the next meeting and talk for 15 minutes. Why couldn't that overture be made?
We could put them on the agenda. I think the question to always consider, at least from my perspective, when we talk about bringing in guest speakers with expertise or whatever they're bringing to us, is that so far we've been having a really hard time getting through the material that we've had. So not that we can't add things, but we should be very intentional about whether those are things that are the highest priority for us. So I agree, that would be a good way to get them to download the information to us. So do others have an opinion about how important it is to get that information sooner rather than later? Or do we want to try to dedicate some time to that, or ask another way, Srini?
I think there are a number of areas where we could use expertise. I would rather see a process where we highlight specific pathways where we need an external perspective, prioritize them, and then identify a group of people who we can interface with. I'm not sure whether that activity needs to happen before we complete the plan. So that's my thought.
I think there should be a priority on completing this plan. Everybody's waiting for it. And we can always tinker with it and improve it.
Okay. Anyone else have a strong feeling this both both flow in the direction of let's not interject into this process till it's the right time. Donna?
I'd say whenever anybody from the schools are willing to present to us, we should invite them, you know. So I would say sooner rather than later, because a lot of our measures do talk about things that the schools, you know, in terms of driver education and things like that. But it would be great if they could be incorporated into, you know, their ideas could be incorporated into the report, showing that, yes, we have included them. And they have thought about it, because I wonder sometimes whether they think about these things at all. You know, they're not very open about that issue.
Sorry, my comment was not about the schools. My comment
I
was
know.
about town experience.
Right, I didn't take it that way. So when it comes to schools, I mean, schools should definitely be part of our outreach at a minimum.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering when you described it that way, Donna, is that we have this whole outreach plan to go and get feedback from different parts of the community. And if we want to get feedback from all sorts of folks on the proposed items.
We definitely would need feedback from the school district, because there's some of the things that we are proposing will affect them quite dramatically.
Yep. So maybe that can be incorporated into the outreach
Yeah,
process.
even though I think we were careful not to propose anything on their behalf. You know, everything that applies to any other employer in the city would apply to them. And then there's educational programming that we didn't really include other than driver's ed. And that, I think that was the only one we didn't really put much in there in terms of curriculum. We avoided putting anything in about curriculum, because, you know, that wouldn't be well received, I don't think.
No, but we did talk about encouraging or making it very favorable for children not to drive their cars to school, but to use a school bus system, which is already there, and which many students have to use because they aren't from the kinds of families that can afford to have a car for the children to drive to school, or are not working so they can drive their kids to school. It's an equity issue as well. The use of the school bus system instead of all these thousands and thousands of vehicle miles traveled back and forth to school. That's really, I think that's a big issue.
But now that you mention it, Donna, we should include something to the effect of, you know, weave climate change into the curriculum. Schools reject it, but we should have that as an action item. I think that's actually a really good item.
Well, it is, but it's going to be more effective if it comes from them.
I agree. I mean, we can ask them to react to it, but as this task force, I think we should propose it.
So do we want to pick up this conversation? I'm looking down the agenda. We've got item 5 is public outreach, and should we sort of try to fold some of these ideas into the public outreach plan and make sure that we have a targeted list of stakeholders that can, you know, get special treatment to make sure that we hear back from them, rather than just the sort of blanketed offers to get feedback surveys, things like that. I mean, it sounds like there's some sort of key constituencies that we want to make an effort to track down and get more focused feedback from them. School being one, the, you know, architect and builder community. There's probably a few groups in there that we want to make sure to put some focused thought into.
I think definitely the home builders and realtors are going to be interesting.
So do we want to make this list now and address number 5 now, or do you want to wait and finish and do item 4 first, Ethan?
I mean, I guess.
I don't care. I just want to know where we're headed.
Yeah, no, I know we're sort of rolling on this. On the one hand, it would be nice to get the pathways and actions wrapped up so that Anne and Melanie can, you know, get the plan onto the next stage. I know there's some things that are overdue in terms of planning the public outreach. So
Let's follow let's just follow the agenda.
Oh, the agenda.
Yeah, let's try to make sure that we actually get to it.
I think we need to hit item 3.
Yes, item 3 is next. If no one else has any other questions on item 2 about additions, changes, or deletions. All right. Members of the public who have comments or questions or items not related to the agenda?
I think I'm the only member here. I'm Roseanne Greco.
Hey, Roseanne.
I just want to throw this out to y'all, not for a discussion, but just for information. I was on a meeting yesterday with the climate justice group I'm a part of, and learned that Underhill just created a climate action task force, or a climate task force. And I think, Anne, I think they mentioned you as helping them, or a member of the CCRPC, assisting them as well. But it prompted me to mention this to you. You might all be aware of it. And maybe there are multiple climate action task forces around Vermont, but if there are, it would be great to know what they're doing so you could share information and learn from each other. So you may already be aware of that, and you may already be aware of what other task force are doing around Vermont, but if not, it probably would be beneficial. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's a good point. Roseanne, I know, and you've been coordinating within Chittenden County, at least among energy committees. Is there a thought that these climate action task force are a separate beast that would get the same attention?
So, yeah, I did have a conversation with a member of the Underhill Planning Commission that they're interested in doing what you guys are doing, creating a climate action plan. She had asked me a whole bunch of different questions. So yeah, I'm not surprised that they're forming that group. But I don't think they've gotten very far yet. I don't know of any other climate action task forces that have been put together in other towns in Chittenden County.
Yeah.
Other than, you know,
Middlebury published theirs a couple months ago.
Yeah,
I think it was a draft.
Yeah, they're not in my territory, so
Right.
I don't interact with them.
But
Sure.
theirs was actually produced by a consultant from Minnesota, which was interesting.
Yeah, and there have been other municipalities in Vermont who have worked with, you know, consultants where that's all they do is work on climate action plans.
Yeah.
And to
Partially
add to
mostly.
that, a lot of, a good majority of the municipalities already in Chittenden County have done enhanced energy planning, according to the Department of Public Service energy planning standards. So those energy plans don't talk specifically about climate adaptation or mitigation, but many of the policies and actions that are in those enhanced energy plans are similar in scope than what we're talking about here as well.
Yeah, certainly good to sync up with other towns around Vermont, because I know there's a few others that have done climate action plans. I don't know how many of them have active groups of citizens that are working on it, though. All right, thanks for the suggestion, Roseanne. So let's crack into the next batch of pathways and actions. See if we can make it to the end. Is that our goal?
That would be lovely. I need to be able to share my screen.
Okay. All right, hold on a moment. I was just going to ask who does the sharing, and I'm just clicking that all participants have sharing capability.
Great.
Great. So that should work for you now.
Okay, is that large enough for people to see?
That's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Tried to make it
Yep,
about the same
it's good for me.
size as last time. Okay. So let me So I just want to show you where we ended up last. We got as far as, we created a new sector. I named it small engines. That's where we ended up last time. We had accepted all those other actions, but since the last meeting, Andrew added a couple things. And Melanie, did you want to talk about our 1.3?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have too much to add, but just want to let you guys know that I've been thinking about it, and that being the renewable energy target that we talked about 2 meetings ago, and just looking into the detail of the renewable energy generation target. The solar energy resource areas that we use to generate the potential was based on land-based solar. So it didn't necessarily take a look at any impervious surface like parking lots. I think the best that we can do within the scope of this project is looking at our GIS data of the parking lots in South Burlington to figure out what the acreage is and make some assumptions on what's possible for parking canopies for solar generation there.
And roofs. Roofs.
Yeah, and rooftops. So the analysis that we did for South Burlington and for all the municipalities assume a certain percentage was capable of rooftop solar. And I closed the window that had that data, but I think it was like 17,000 megawatt hours are potentially capable of rooftop generation. You know, there's structural and technical constraints, so it's not that 100% of homes in South Burlington can accommodate rooftop solar. Also, the distribution network in South Burlington is currently constrained, and there's an additional tariff that is assigned to net meter generation. But we can do kind of a cursory analysis from a parking perspective to see what is the potential there. So just wanted to give you guys a quick update on my thinking on that one.
And so we can keep looking into that for you as we move through this process. And then Andrew added a couple things in the natural areas section. Put your text here in red. The old text is in black. I think you just added a little more detail there. And if everybody is okay with that, I'll just go ahead and accept Andrew's language there.
Since you scroll down, remind me, that column is what content?
So that's the science-based targets. Some of these targets are not science-based. They're not as data-driven as the bigger ones. So they're targets. So this would be a target.
Didn't we have a discussion about whether we should include or not include the words "as permitted by law"?
Oh, well, so this is the target. You're talking about the action, and that I didn't change. That was a particular action. And it's not in this section.
Yeah, you had it.
I did have it.
Right. N1.1.
Okay. Oh yeah, we just added a little more to that. Yeah, so that's the action. This over here is the target for the whole sector, natural area sector.
Yep.
So any qualms with me accepting Andrew's language?
So this
Fine
particular
to me.
one, sorry, this particular pathway protects our existing capability for carbon storage, right? And natural life habitat.
Yeah. And we just clarified what we meant by natural habitat and wildlife. That includes insects as well as other wildlife.
So one thought, I don't know, I had not, sorry, I didn't comment on this before. Other cities, what they have specifically focused on is modifying green spaces to increase the ability of carbon capture. So what I mean by that is look at existing canopy and existing vegetation in areas that are already where you cannot develop. For example, you look at main roads in South Burlington, how many roads are not tree lined. So they have identified specific canopy targets to increase carbon capture capability. So I'm not sure whether you.
So for the target, if we added sequestration as well as storage, would that do it for you?
Yeah, I think sequestration, yeah, and storage, yeah.
Because we do have that canopy action.
Okay.
Down in the action.
Those are the same, but that's okay.
They're not actually. I just recently learned that. So sequestration is the pulling in.
Okay.
The storage is the holding in.
Yeah.
But sequestration and carbon storage are the same thing.
That's what we can. That's okay.
So a couple wordsmithing things. If we're going this direction, I think it would be more clear if we put carbon in front of sequestration. So it's clear that carbon was the thing being both sequestered and stored.
Yeah.
And I'm also noticing that the original text in black is almost entirely mirrored by the first part of this new section in red.
The original text should be deleted.
Yeah.
So then the question is, the change then is shifting priority habitat blocks to remaining natural resource areas.
Right, that's the shift.
And I guess the one question I have from our discussion last time is that when we were working on some of the other language around natural lands, we were trying to pick the most specific concrete terms that we could so that it would be easier to enforce it later on and have like a testable metric of what are we actually talking about here, so we don't get into a lot of like, oh, well, that doesn't mean me type of issues. And I wonder if priority habitat block has a specific meaning, or if natural resource areas has a specific meaning, like which of those has a, do they mean the same thing? Do they mean different things? Does one of them have a clearly defined meaning? I'm not an expert here.
Resource areas is broader. Meadows, forests, grasslands, and farmlands includes more than just habitat blocks. That was my intent.
Yeah, I think that the priority habitat blocks is a very, very confusing language to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it happens to be uniquely in our reg. It's not a term that most people would know, and I think it's too narrow.
Well, our habitat blocks are defined and originally by Arrowwood Environmental, so it is quite unique.
I think habitat blocks are defined by the state as well. So what Andrew's language is doing is expanding beyond the habitat blocks.
Yeah, intentionally so.
Right. And I think that's a reasonable thing to do, because even some of those habitat blocks, some portions of those are likely to be developed, because they're not protected right now. I mean, they're still eligible for development. It's everything else that is retained as a natural resource area that you want to focus on. Because and the way I think about it is that there are some habitat blocks, and I kind of understand where Davis is coming from. You go into some portions of the land and it's scrubby land. And I think a forester could make that much, much more productive in terms of carbon storage and sequestration, because scrubland is not the best for that. Large mature trees are really good for it, more than scrubland is. So you know, I'd say that there's a lot of improvement that can be done even on existing natural areas.
But I just have also, I'm sorry, one more tweak on the pathway. So the pathway is ensure land development will be adaptive and resilient. I think it should really say ensure land is managed to be adaptive and resilient.
Or land use.
Yeah, or however land use is it, whatever, but not land development. I think it should say it's
Oh, yeah, right.
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 I mean, that does it for me. I'm comfortable with that.
Right.
Right, so is everyone okay just replacing the old
Yes.
black text there with red?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and so then in that first action, Andrew took out the first sentence about habitat loss. So that is consistent with what you just changed in the target. Everybody's okay with that? Hearing no qualms, I say let's move on. Comments we had on any of those actions that we covered in the last meeting. So we're starting now
Can I?
with
I just wanted to under government operations, and I think it's under GO 1.2. You can go to that one. One thing that's 1.2. Yeah, the green purchasing policy. I think it needs to be clear that this is not just for equipment, but also for services. I was rudely reminded about this going to the library today, and landscape people who are hired by the city to put mulch down in the planting areas along Market Street. They were doing something really, really stupid. Like, I couldn't get over it. They were putting mulch down on the planting beds, which was fine, but they put it down really, really dry, you know, and so it blew all over the place. So then they came back in with one of those really noisy fossil fuel powered, you know, blowers, and were blowing it all over the place, including right into my lungs as I was biking there. And I thought, okay, there should be a policy that says if we're going to hire landscapers to do this, that they not use blowers, you know, that, you know, they don't, it was totally unnecessary. And I talked to the young guy and I said, could you have just wet the material down a little bit so it didn't blow all over the place when you applied it? He's like, that's not what I was told to do. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I think sometimes you think you shouldn't have to tell people this, but when you're doing a purchasing agreement, I think you're just going to have to spell out or compare different ones and say, you know, we don't want you using gas powered blowers. We want you to minimize the amount of truckloads of hauling you need to do for a sewage, for a stormwater project. You know, there needs to be some language that you know, so it's not all done based on the lowest price.
So there's a green operations policy item for the next one.
Yeah, that's for city operations, but when it's purchase services, I think it has to be very clear that, you know, when they're taking bids for work, that these policies have to be included in those purchase agreements as well.
Could you just say for by 2030, all city operations, including those purchased, will be following green practices?
I think what Donna's getting is we need to define.
And just say including purchase services.
Yeah.
And
In other words, it's what the city does, and it's also what the city purchases to have done.
right. Yeah, because the stormwater is a huge amount of money that the city spends every
Yes.
year. And, you know, it became really apparent to me that they were taking the low bidder over a much better contractor who had a better idea about how to reduce the amount of fill that had to be brought in for that project. But they weren't taken because they weren't the low bid. And I think the city has to have more room to negotiate with people, you know, to do the right thing as opposed to taking the low bid.
Right.
Everyone good with that change?
Well, we need to define. I mean, a green purchasing policy needs some kind of definition, unless it's already in the public domain and known what a green purchasing policy is.
Well, do we have to do that, or does the
No,
implementation?
we don't have to do it. We don't have to do it, but at some point it'll have to be done.
Yeah,
But
I would
implementation,
imagine that would be in the implementation portion.
Yeah.
And like Melanie said, there'll be quite a bit of work done on government operations. Implementation lines.
So does that cover that change?
I think it encompasses it, yes.
Um,
So now we are on the adaptation and resilience sector. And we did get a comment from Michael for AR 1.1. Is everyone okay with Michael's change?
I think we should make it maybe more precise, which is increase buffers around river corridor streams in accordance with the best science, which I think in Vermont is 300 feet.
Well, doesn't the state regulate that though?
The city has the power to.
Yeah, but there's certain places where the city and the city can't override the state.
City can absolutely override the state in this respect. It just did. So the city is entitled to apply its local values for this kind of area, in this kind of area.
Increasing buffers to what, or that's to be
They
determined?
were increased in the last round of LDRs.
Yep.
In some places, not everywhere.
Yeah, that's what Paul said.
And that was challenged by a number of people that we were being more stringent than the state.
right.
We acknowledged that, yes, we were purposefully.
Good for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and the state's rules were developed 20 or 30 years ago, so.
But Michael, I think when you and I looked at some of the state materials, the recommendation was 300 feet. And when we met with Jan Tilke, I thought his recommendation was 300 feet, which the state, didn't wind up doing. But I think as a committee, that's what we should be recommending.
Yeah. We should go as far as we can on buffers. I mean,
So maybe we can
in a
say
practical sense.
continue to increase protection. And what was it you said, Andrew?
I'd like,
According to the science?
my own take on this would be to be more precise, to increase the buffers surrounding river corridors and streams to 300 feet in accordance with the best science.
That's fine.
Okay. The next one, AR 1.2.
Same
Everyone
thing.
okay with that one?
Right now, we don't have 100-foot buffers around wetlands outside residential areas. So it needs to be all increased wetland buffers around all wetlands.
Wait, are we on 1.2 now or still on 1.1?
1.3.
1.3.
Oh, I was just going to comment on 1.2 is kind of interesting because when I read that, I think of green roofs. And we haven't mentioned anything about green roofs at all in any discussion. But that's exactly what that is. You know, if you're building large roofs, you know, now a lot of people are putting solar on a large roof, but green roofs, that's exactly what that's for, is to reduce the amount of runoff off of large buildings. And it's an expensive thing that isn't done here very much, but it is definitely a mitigating factor for flooding, where you have a lot of pavement and a lot of roof.
Donna, are you referring to the absorption of runoff from roofs?
That's what green roofs do. They slow they slow it down considerably by hours and hours. It just absorbs and it releases it over a much longer period of time.
So I think this action was really meant more to be talking about stormwater infrastructure in general, including, you know, rain gardens and all kinds of infrastructure that can absorb runoff.
I would assume green roofs would go in the building section if we were going to add something for that.
Well, I
But
don't
this
know
leaves it
whether it
pretty
means
broad.
as an example, all the downspouts from my house go into the ground and into soakaway drains, long trenches that I've dug and filled with stone and so on. So it's all absorbed. It doesn't. So is that what you're talking about, Donna? That sort of thing.
Well, I mean, that's a landscaping principle. That's basically like a rain garden. It's not really a rain garden, but it's part of that principle of returning storm runoff to the ground as quickly as possible. Rain gardens are similar idea, but with plants.
This is a recharge, specifically recharge, and nothing to do with landscaping.
Well,
that the stormwater goes into the ground and doesn't flood over the ground.
Well, it follows in that same category. I mean,
all right, let's not fiddle with semantics. I'm happy with what's there.
Can we go back up to 1.1? I think we're kind of using the defined term capital R river, capital C corridor, which I think is narrower than all rivers and streams. I prefer to just use lowercase rivers and streams.
Where, Andrew?
Yeah, she has it. It has it.
Streams.
Yeah.
So getting back to AR 1.2, I just want to point out that I believe South Burlington has the most, what do I want to say, probably the best stormwater program in Vermont. I think you have one of the best stormwater public works directors in the state. So I think that South Burlington's doing very well in that regard.
Yeah. I would instead of continue to, because I don't see a whole lot of this done outside of what civil engineers do in their own plans. I would say implement green infrastructure principles, or significantly improve the use of green infrastructure principles, because it's really not being done to any great degree yet.
Well, an example, the library's roof, there are two sections that were supposed to be, living roofs, and we didn't have enough money, so we had to cut that. They were built, I believe, so in the future, we could invest and turn them into, green roofs, but right now they are not.
Yeah, it's a structural thing. It's definitely heavier, a heavier roof, and you need a more of a built-up curb to do it. But it's an engineered product. I mean, you put it down and, and the water comes from the sky and it grows plants.
So I'm concerned about time here and going down rabbit holes again on a lot of detail about some of these items when I wonder if we're not better off trying to capture the more broad strokes of what we're trying to accomplish.
I'm good with just changing the language to implement versus continue. That's
Yeah,
fine.
I think we should actually delete continue to in 1.1 also, it should say increase.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So Michael also added this comment for 1.3. Are you guys okay using Michael's comment?
I think say increase wetland buffers in accordance with the best science.
That's fine by me.
Are there other things about, I mean, the initial one was protect wetlands. Are we losing something by taking that out, or is the wetland buffers the important part there? And that encompasses.
They're
wetlands.
already protected by law to some extent, and we in South Burlington have protected them a little more.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the main thing with wetlands is to make sure that they're defined. Because we found here at Village at Dorset Park that a major wetland that is directly adjacent to our neighborhood was never categorized by the state. And so by going to the state and getting it categorized, it's now much better protected than it was. So don't assume that because there's a wetland that's on the state's wetland maps.
It does require delineation. I was quite intimately involved in that with Tina Heath because it was classified as class 3 and we got it reclassified as class 2.
Right.
Okay, are we ready to move on to 1.4? We're making progress, guys.
Let's go. That's fine.
So 1.4 is okay.
Enhanced, EN.
Enhanced, yeah.
Enhanced, right.
On 1.4, are there aspects of master planning or coordination within the county? This seems like a broader scope than what South Burlington will do on its own.
Yeah, that's a state, there's state energy, state emergency management office.
So maybe instead of saying develop, maybe say leverage or, incorporate or adopt. I'm just not sure whether South Burlington would do something like this on its own.
I'd say
South Burlington does need to develop emergency response plans. There's especially because of the increased flooding that's going to be happening with climate change. And they are, working with the Regional Planning Commission on all the municipalities are working on the regional with their RPCs on their emergency response plans.
Okay, maybe that's the aspect that needs to be captured. Yeah. So okay, I'm good with that. Thanks.
Okay. And then this has to do specifically with stormwater infrastructure. Paul hasn't had a chance to run this by Tom DePietro yet, so that still needs his review. I don't know if you have any comments about that.
I'll continue to pursue. Again, I think we want to be careful about having language that's sort of wishy-washy. Is it ensures resilient stormwater infrastructure instead of pursue. Pursue is, okay, let's try to do it. Ensure means do it.
Or require.
Require, yeah, require even, or ensure.
I like it, sure.
My comment on 1.6 should probably go up into let me see where it might be. 1.2 possibly.
Yeah.
So this next one, 1.7, has to do with, the extreme heat events that we've been having. South Burlington does have designated cooling centers, and they do have an emergency response plan having to do with extreme heat events. So this is just an extra step of making sure that the public is really aware in advance of extreme heat events of where to go and what to do in those situations. So this would be more of a communications effort by the city. And the next one has to do with, I forgot about this one, Donna. This is what you just talked about, green roofs.
It's not.
So
Cool roofs is a light colored roof. It's a, it's a more reflective roof. So that's not the same, but this does, this is a lot easier to implement. Light colored roofs are pretty easy to do. I'm not sure what cool pavement is.
I think it's
I think it's light colored paving stones rather than the asphalt.
Well, it's asphalt with a light colored, what's the word?
Aggregate?
Aggregate, yes, thank you.
But you're still going to have the black bitumen.
No really way around that.
It's hard. I mean, you can get it to go brown, but you can't get it to much.
Concrete instead, I think, is the solid paving option.
I think the idea for these is to reduce the amount of heat in urban areas.
It'll do. That'll do.
Okay.
Well, it's also by reducing the quantity of pavement, which I think South Burlington is largely doing that in its developed LDRs.
I think we addressed that in transportation.
Yeah, reducing parking, reducing parking lots, that would go a long way toward reducing heat island.
Okay.
Is less parking.
So we're on the last action here. Are you guys okay?
We can't say that.
I
We can't say reduce parking.
Oh,
we covered it. I think we covered it. In
Size of
transportation.
parking lots?
I have something to say about parking, but we're not on that subject. At the end of the meeting, or when we've done what we set out to do here, I'll come back to it.
Well, this isn't the quantity of parking. It's just the, it's the area of pavement, really.
Right. I think area of parking would have been handled in transportation.
You can say promote cool roofs and quantity of pavement of pavement. In other words, don't pave as much.
So it's pavement area.
Yeah.
Well, then let's be clear about what it is. Yes, thank you.
There you go. There you go.
so it would be a reduction.
That works.
And this one has to do with, the city making investments in public spaces, green public spaces, help with heat waves, intensified flooding, carbon sequestration. And then in doing so, prioritizing neighborhoods with disproportionately low access.
Meaning plant more trees in poor neighborhoods?
Well, you know, there might already be some nice parks in areas where people have easy access. Rather than increasing those, the idea would be to increase green spaces in areas where people don't have this easy access to
Oh, okay.
currently.
That makes sense.
Okay, we have moved on to the next sector, which is agriculture and food systems. There's a couple on this first one. Okay, so
Just
what about requiring?
the item itself, instead of saying, this looks like it's limited to neighborhoods with this disproportionate low access, shouldn't we say something like with a focus on, but not limited to?
Well, it says
No, it's saying
prioritize.
prioritize.
Doesn't that kind of?
Does? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I moved on to the next one, to AF. So I was on AF.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Great.
Yeah, in South Burlington, finished. Rather than in neighborhoods with disproportionately low access.
Well, we can
Do it everywhere.
in with a focus on, but I don't think we should exclude other areas.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure where we are. Are you in this language here? Andrew?
Yes, F1.1, AF 1.1.
Okay.
I
What?
mean,
Um,
we should remember that the things that aren't in the plan won't necessarily get omitted. The city may still make plans and do things that aren't specified by us. So we shouldn't worry that.
But it's not. But we shouldn't specify something that's limiting either.
No, we don't want to, but on the other hand, we do want to be sure that the city puts serious attention and resource into disproportionately.
Adding the word prioritizing works for me.
Well, yeah, because we're gonna have to, someday, we're actually gonna do the equity, et cetera, standards. I mean, we keep putting that off, but someday we're gonna have to do it. We're gonna have to look at these things and think about, have we emphasized that enough?
Regenerative farming. I don't think most people are going to know what that means. And no-till practices. I mean, these are gardens. These aren't farms. These are gardens.
Right.
And so you have to really think about what's appropriate. In most of South Burlington, this is going to be raised bed gardens, because I don't know if there's any part of South Burlington that has good soil. Does anybody have good soil where they live?
Common Roots is a real farm, and you have the other one right over here, which is a real farm. I mean, there are some real bread and butter. Yeah, I mean, there are some real farms.
Yeah, well, those are the two,
Yeah.
and that's about it.
Well, but the community gardens at the Wheeler Homestead are
Those are exceptional because they've never been developed. So you're right. Anything that's on farmland that has never been scraped or, had soil removed from it is going to be the exception to the rule in South Burlington, because so many places there's soil, but it needs a lot of amendment to get stuff to really grow.
So I was trying to put it on camera, but I wasn't able to do it. I just got a book written by Charlie Nardozzi on no-dig gardening, which
Yep.
essentially is the same as no-till. I could change it to no-dig. And he's talking about small gardens. He's talking about
Right.
raised beds, community gardens, organic practices.
Yeah. And
Is that what you mean, Michael?
It's exactly what I mean, and I practiced it right here in my small vegetable patch. Yes, Donna is right that when I started, the soil around here was terrible. It had quite a bit of builder's rubble buried, which I had to get rid of. But yeah, I had to amend the soil a lot, but it's not that difficult. You keep adding
Yeah.
compost and straw.
It
And
yeah.
so
it takes time, and that was kind of where my comment came from about, for some neighborhoods, access to the materials, just compost. I mean, just getting compost for people. It's like most people have no idea. It's like, oh, you buy bags of it and you buy the cheap stuff and it's no good. So that's why I wanted to encourage the recreation and parks. They do a lot of sport activities, but I don't see how this serves a very different audience than most of their programs. And I'm just suggesting that it makes sense for recreation and parks, since I think they manage the garden plots too, for them to take a bigger role in helping, create more gardens throughout the city on condo and, basically condominium owned land mostly, but, common areas and in multifamily projects where they can.
I didn't use the word encouraged. I used the word require, because on city-owned property, it can be required.
On community gardens.
Yeah. City-managed community gardens, because there's one at Wheeler, there's one at Wheelock, and
Is
there
there
are probably others that I don't know about.
is there staff to go out and police whether people are sticking pitchforks in the ground?
No, it's the city that prepares this garden in the spring.
It does, and the city actually does till the gardens in the spring.
Exactly. But
So-
Donna, it's not complicated. It's simple things like just use old newspaper. That's
I
that's
see
all.
what you're saying, Michael. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's much more easy to accomplish that when it's your own garden than you're doing it for rental plots and stuff like that.
And I'll say it's simple to do. It's hard to do well. We dedicated in our community garden a portion to do no-till, and the tomatoes didn't really thrive there. So we'll try it again this year, but it wasn't a very popular experiment.
You need more compost. And I
Compost
don't
is
think we
key.
should worry about, Donna's pointing out the difficulty. I don't think we should worry about the difficulty of getting it done. Let's just put it in here so that it gets done.
Well, just don't say you're requiring it, it's just like, I think encourage is probably appropriate for that one.
Essentially what you're doing is you're adding a lot of detail to give, if it's the natural resources and conservation committees that are putting together a nature-based solution program, and giving them a lot of ideas. But that's essentially the action, is to create a nature-based solution program.
Right.
And also, I mean, the part that Parks and Recreation plays in this, it's kind of an action side of a policy. So, I mean, we had in other places sort of separated the action from the policy, but it's up to you where you think it belongs.
I'd just like to point out that Roseanne has pointed out that there is good soil in South Burlington, and it was identified and mapped in the 2013 Sustainable Agriculture Report.
Yeah, and you're not supposed to build houses. You're not supposed to build houses on that soil. Right. So that means that when you have a yard, it's lousy soil.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So are we ready to move on?
Yes.
I tend to also agree. I think the word encourage, require is really heavy-handed for that particular. I agree with you. I mean, I know regenerative practices and no-till are the best, but it feels a little heavy-handed for a community garden. I don't know.
No, who are we encouraging?
The community.
No,
The community that rents. yeah.
excuse me, just let me finish.
Yeah.
They don't prepare the gardens, the city prepares the gardens.
But who does the planting?
Beg your pardon?
Who does the planting?
But this is about all gardens. This isn't just about the ones on the city parks. This is,
We can only require if it's a city managed.
well, I know. So most of these are not going to be city managed. They're going to be local gardens in neighborhoods.
Are you going to go around?
Well, maybe we can say in city managed community gardens, regenerative farming and no dig practices will be utilized. In private or other gardens, we
They're
will
encouraged.
encourage these two methodologies. And then you go farther down and we're going to be offering classes. So if people don't know how to do it, they'll be able to learn how.
Let's
So if
do,
you want to differentiate and say where the city is preparing gardens, we'll use this, methodology, but you probably have to
Right.
train the people who are going to rent the plot, how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this again is why I think there's some logic to trying to frame these actions in an outcome-oriented fashion and sort of designate who's going to be responsible for trying to get the behavior changed across the whole community. It seems hard from my perspective that in 5-10 minutes here we're going to come up with a program that is going to get implemented in 2 or 3 different settings, and there's a lot of detail to be worked out, and it's almost easier just to say
Encourage.
that's what we're trying to do. Let's
Say encourage. Hmm.
Are we ready to move on? 1.2. The idea here is to support organizations like Common Roots. You guys have this great organization in South Burlington that does farm to fork programs, and they do food education in schools, and they promote sustainable agricultural practices, and they support local farms, etc.
VMT. What does VMT mean?
Vermont vehicle miles.
To reduce, yes. Okay.
So reducing reliance on
Yeah.
shipped in food from out of state.
Well, you could say their associated EMT. It's not ours, it's their.
Well, there's an active debate about whether you do life cycle based or boundary based assessments. So life cycle based would put the the impact on whoever buys the stuff and causes it to be shipped, but it's a debate for the day.
So in the same vein, 1.3 would be to encourage retailers to carry local products. I was thinking of Trader Joe's. That might be a tough sell.
Entry. That's their business
They
model.
have
I don't know if you're going
great
to change that.
products. They have great products. I love them, but very few of them are local.
None of them
grown
are
or made.
local.
Shrink wrap cucumbers.
I've actually gotten cheese there that is local, but yeah, it's probably the only thing.
It's probably the same cheese that's available in their Oregon store.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Right.
So then Donna added this last action. Is everyone okay with this one?
This is kind of what most of us do when we can't afford Common Roots. And have the time. That's an important thing, but it's a good way to spend time.
Yeah, I mean, again, for readability, I would suggest, the last 2 sentences are good information for us. I don't I don't know
I
if
don't
we need to
we need
include it all in the plan.
No,
Yeah, that the last two sentences were not necessary.
All right.
Good.
So congratulations, you guys. You made it through all the sectors.
Can I, so now, so
Yay.
before we congratulate ourselves, could you just, did we, I just couldn't remind me, did we say anything about refrigerants in, like supermarkets, encouraging or requiring supermarkets to shift refrigerants from like the HFCs to ammonia or CO2 or something?
I think we
CO2.
did in buildings and thermal, we had a refrigerant.
I didn't remember.
in commercial buildings, didn't we?
We said something about refrigerants?
I thought so, but I could be wrong. I
I
could be.
thought we did too.
Let me see. It sounds so familiar, though. Let me see.
And it's basically all buildings, all commercial buildings that have cooling.
Yeah, but for supermarkets, it's, really massive.
Well, if it's a big building, it can be massive too.
Yeah, that is a
I
building
think Andrew's
issue,
also
not a,
referring to how they keep the food cool or frozen.
not an agriculture issue. I swear we had one in here, maybe we took it out. So I know the state is going to be working with grocery stores for sure on refrigerants.
Yeah, because I think there are companies now that are earning money. They're making good money by going around and contacting very small commercial businesses that still have refrigerant from old equipment, because there's it's a gold mine collecting that stuff.
Like, there are people that kind of mine unused old refrigerant, but I'm
Yeah.
talking
Yeah, I don't see it in here, but
about a system.
I'll make a note of it. at the
Okay.
bottom here.
And I do think that it makes sense to come back to Donna's point about the schools, to add something about encourage schools to, include climate change in curricula.
Well, see, I think they do, but
Okay.
maybe not to the extent that,
There-
so I guess if they do,
It's not been my experience, Helen.
okay.
So if that were the action, who would be tasked with doing what to achieve that outcome? How would we frame that up?
The school board.
But the school board doesn't report. I mean, Helen, correct me if I'm wrong. Can the city council mandate?
No, we don't direct the school board. And that's why I would like to have them be part of these conversations, and because the bottom line for the city of South Burlington are the goals, and that includes the schools.
Yep.
So we need to get them commenting on these things and coming up with their own ideas about what they can do to promote or help us reach the goals.
And we could certainly prompt them.
Yeah. So I heard earlier from Melanie that the government operations is going to take a priority. So when we do that, is
Yeah.
the scope of the schools included under government operations?
Well, see, I
then-
think they should be for this topic. Because it's all of us.
Right.
I mean, those
Yeah.
are large buildings that are essentially owned by the public.
Yeah. So
It's not a
and they're-
private enterprise.
yeah, and they're funded by the public, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, so I would think that there is a mechanism to prompt them to participate and be upfront. I mean, this is. I mean, I think it needs to be a requirement. I don't think it can be a suggestion at this point.
But that's the question, right? So if it can be a requirement, then I think it makes perfect sense. The government operations boundary, as I understood it, was defined by things that if the city council says we're adopting these policies, it just is, right? Like it's your purview to do that. But if the same is not true of the school, it wouldn't be government operations so much. We'd have to take an approach similar to what we're taking for residences and businesses, where we educate, incent, all those different things. And not disagreeing with any of this. Like I completely agree that we should accomplish this with the school, but it just, what I'm hearing from Helen is that right now we can't tell the school to do anything. I mean, unless
Well, we can't, but I'm wondering if we can have some topics and have them school operations and leave them blank and ask them to fill in. I mean, we could have some areas that we think make sense, some suggestions.
Well, as far as curriculum regarding climate change is concerned, there is an organization in Vermont called beep.org. I put it in the chat, and they do go around to schools and help educators with climate change curriculum. My husband is a teacher in South Burlington High School, and I did send this to him and asked him to send around to teachers. I think he did. They're all pretty busy this time of year. But that would be what I would suggest, is trying to get BEEP involved with the school.
Yeah.
Or getting the school to commit to working with BEEP on curriculum.
But don't you want the schools to be involved in the climate action plan in a larger sense than just curriculum?
Yes, we were
So
talking
we
about.
need
Yeah.
We need to meet with them, say, these are the things that we put in government ops that the city, is going to commit to. We want the city to commit to in terms of equipment that they use, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Those cities. And we would like to go over that with the school board or their representatives or whatever, to say, what of these kinds of things do you think the school should be doing?
I guess what I'm asking is it different from what, IDX or GE Healthcare, whatever they are now, right? They're a big building and a big employer, and we could sit down with them and say, what are you going to do for the climate action plan? And we can, right? Like, we have all these big entities who are responsible for a lot of emissions, and we need them to take actions. Again, this is not to say not to do it, but like, I'm just questioning, is there something special about the school that
different, Ethan? The school is a public entity funded by the taxpayers. Beta Technologies is not. So.
But does it give us any leverage over them?
Do we have
the bills.
School board?
Sure, we have leverage. We pay the bills.
Well, they pay their own bills, but I think in terms of the community and collaboration and working together with education, I think we can convince them that they could look at this or should look at this and come up with the sets of things that they can do, whether it's buying, green or whatever, that would be important, and consider, even some of the transportation ones.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of that we should tell them. We should get the idea across that they're partnering with us.
Yes, yeah, I think it's a partnership. It's all of our taxpayers. It's a.
Oh, excuse me for interrupting the conversation. I raised my hand, but I'm just going to jump in here because I have a suggestion to help capture what you guys are saying about the school district. So I think figuring out the best way to work with the school district in the climate action plan fits into the government operations sector. So my suggested idea is perhaps adding another action that captures the sentiment and the need to work with the school district. So adding in language that says collaborate with the school district as necessary, or as needed on the implementation of government operations and the climate action plan, just to capture that there is a need to work more specifically and closely with the school district, when the city moves into the implementation phase of government operations, because I don't think we can necessarily work out the how and the details here, but just to capture the idea of the need to work more closely with the school district. And then when we get into implementation of government operations, maybe that could be worked out more
Right,
specific.
but let's not leave out the curricula part too. I mean, it's not just the school's footprint, but honestly, education is. in my
Right,
mind, far
right,
more.
that's true.
Well,
I added both of those things at the bottom of the spreadsheet to,
yeah, and I
as
agree with
placeholder.
Melanie. I agree that with Melanie that there needs to be a section in government operations because, because the schools are such a big energy and carbon producer in total in the city, they need to know what their target is. It's like what portion of this and how does that translate into targets for them to achieve through their buildings and transportation? Because if they're going to do their own planning, they need to know what their targets are. And I think if anything, this whole process is a real help to them because if they can include their plans in this report, then VHB can assist in developing the carbon reduction that goes along with those plans. So I think if anything, we're doing something very beneficial for them because they'd have to do it themselves otherwise.
Mhm.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, Donna, VHB is working on the transportation sector, not government operations. But
Well, a big chunk of the schools is transportation
Yeah.
and buildings. Most of it is buildings and transportation because that's where a lot of their energy use is. Well, almost all of their energy uses in those areas. And those are. Go ahead.
I think we could insert in there, collaborate and coordinate, which suggests that they're already doing some things, and I know they are.
Mhm.
And that would suggest this partnership.
Right.
Maybe we partner with them and whatever.
Yeah,
So
'cause it would be good to know, for instance, what their heating source plans are, their heating plant. If they're planning any solar projects, if they're incorporating solar in their roofing, their roofing plans.
yeah,
I really wanted a whole new school.
Well,
Well,
and
just-
that's actually an important one too, because, and and Helen, I sent you a CC on this. I'm sure you didn't see it yet, but
No, I did. It was very good. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I mean, this is information that's coming out that's being directed at schools, both on curriculum and all their buildings and transportation. And it's being done by the NBI, which is the National Buildings Institute. So I sent it to the school board to say, hey, here you go. And then at the bottom, I mentioned it's like, it would be great if we could collaborate more with, because we're doing this climate action plan, and let's get together and make sure that we're on the same page. Kind of thing.
can I make a couple of suggestions on this, just to make sure that we have the conversation is more direct and more impactful? I think the school board needs to hear that there is a scope of activity that the city is going to coordinate based on this government operations that is already funded. So the scope of the government operations includes the taxpayer paid school footprint or infrastructure. That's number one. Number two, when Melanie completes the inventory exercise, it's a good opportunity to increase the awareness of the school board and say that, look, this is where you fit in the overall carbon footprint of South Burlington. I think those are like two basic conversation initiators to bring them in and say, this is why we need to collaborate, and this is how we need to coordinate, to use Helen's words.
Trini, the greenhouse gas emissions inventory is not going to be able to specifically identify the school district's carbon footprint. We're looking at,
How would you go about quantifying government operations? I mean, I'm just curious. What is in government operations of carbon footprint
well,
on the inventory
currently,
work?
so currently the data that we have for the inventory, the government buildings, city-owned buildings are included in the commercial component of the inventory. We don't have separate data for the government operation.
But how would you set objectives for government operations if you're not able to define the footprint of government operations?
The point of the implementation plan for government operations is to develop the tactical, the policy documents, like we talked earlier about the green policies that the city would develop. So working on specifically like what those policies and documents would look like.
Okay, I'm really confused.
Even Craig, I thought that Lou briefly had presented to us, part of the Energy Committee, the carbon footprint of the city. I thought he had all the buildings, he had all that information.
I think you can quantify for the cities, the city of South Burlington building energy use and extrapolate the emissions from that.
Well, the
We
school
would
has-
not have that information for the schools.
The schools has all that information. They have a very good facilities person there who tracks all of this information. So all you got to do is ask them for
I
it.
think that, I mean, this
That'd
is
be awesome
the
if they
thing.
did.
You
But this
can
is the thing.
You can get at it by finding out how much they use, how much gas they use from Vermont gas systems, and how much electricity they use from GM.
Well,
You
you
can
can't get energy
extrapolate
use data. You can't get energy use data for individual customers without their permission, right? So
Just ask the facilities for it. They
Yeah.
have this information.
so again, agreeing on all this stuff, but again, right? We could ask GE Healthcare for theirs. We could ask any number of large users for theirs, and do work with them and do outreach for them. I mean, this is, I had trouble wrapping my head around this at first too, but that while we as taxpayers are paying for the school, and it does make them somewhat unique, that they're not in government operations the way other things in government operations are, where through the edict of the city council, sponsored process that we're in right now, we can get access to data, and we can, work with the city council to set policies. I mean, to the same degree that there's nonprofits in town, and that there's, federal agencies that operate in town that are responsive to us as taxpayers and voters, like the school is a public institution, but there's lots of public institutions that fall within our boundaries, and we're gonna have to work with them all in the same way, where it's a collaborative outreach process, not.
Schools should be asking them for their data.
Yeah.
Gotta be able to measure the schools.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't
Gotta be able to measure.
cooperate. I mean,
I think they're interested in doing that. And I think it would be helpful.
I'm not trying to discourage us.
Their own footprint, but also as a communication tool for the students. I mean, they've got to be able to show that what they're doing, what the impact is. That's a really important message for the population.
I'm not trying to discourage outreach to the school. I'm just saying, I think that the way to deal with this is the way we do outreach to any number of other large actors in town
I think they're
that we
different.
need to work with.
they're
You get-
different.
No, the school is very different.
I think it's different.
Yeah.
So what if they say no?
Well, cross that bridge. Not going to say no.
See, this conversation is very concerning to me. It's very, very concerning. This is part of the city. This is school district is part of the city. There could be 100 other business entities here. You need to have 100 conversations to understand their footprint and their scope of climate change projects or activity. This is one entity. It's a big entity paid by the taxpayers. And we are talking as if they sit in a separate island.
Because we don't have any jurisdiction to force them to do anything.
I'm not talking about jurisdiction. I just suggested two mechanisms to start a conversation with them.
The people, we're going to work with them. I don't think we need to let's cross that bridge. I'd be shocked if we need to force them to work with us on this.
Right.
For any number of reasons. They're different than any of the other things that you've identified. Not the least for the educational opportunity that it brings to the table and showing what the school is doing and the impact that it has.
There's very little likelihood that they would refuse to cooperate. very little. So I don't think that we need jurisdiction and legal basis.
I'm not discouraging us from going after that. I'm just making an argument for why it doesn't belong in government operations, where we're going to take one approach, and why we put it into the outreach process and approach them like we do lots of other entities.
I disagree with that.
the children-
And let's see what happens. No.
I mean,
This is different. This is
we put number one priority on government operations, and we're already diluting it. I don't understand that. So,
Ethan, I think there's a general sense here that we can get the school board to cooperate and provide us with with the information we need. I'm pretty sure.
I'm less worried about the bills and more about whether we can mandate that they take certain actions the way we will with other government policy.
We can't mandate that they take actions. We know we can't do that. We're talking about here footprint and whether they'll share information with us. I'd be shocked if they wouldn't. And then we're talking about partnership and coordination on the actions.
Yeah, I think we've beaten this one to death.
Yeah.
Can we move on?
For Ethan's sake, I think, I understand where he's coming from. I don't think we can tell them how to achieve all of their climate goals, but I think they need to share with us what their consumption is so that we can determine what percentage of the city's goals can be allocated to them. I don't think we have to tell them how. They can look at the things that the city is doing and decide for themselves. That's what they have a facilities manager for.
So
They figure out what they can do. They have transportation department, that they can figure out. I don't know. I've talked with the transportation people as part of the bike and ped, and I don't have a huge amount of confidence in their planning skills. They basically run things efficiently, but from a planning perspective, they probably need some help. But I think that it's up to them to determine how they meet those goals. But I think we definitely can help put them on the map and include them in the city as part of the climate goals.
He's beating this one to death. He's beating this one to death. Could we just move on this, really?
Yeah.
My concern about
Can we move on, please?
Okay. Do we want to take a vote on all of the policies as written, or what are people asking to move on to?
On the agenda. If there's nothing left on the agenda, then
So
I would move on to have my dinner.
Fair enough. All the other sections we have been voting on to approve that they are satisfactory as written. I will point out that hasn't precluded us going back and continuing to edit them afterwards, but nonetheless, it's sort of a good faith gesture that we are done with at least our first pass on them. So
if you make that motion, if you make the motion, I will second it.
I move that we approve what we have done so far in the whole pathway of others. So that's regeneration, natural areas, this whole last section.
Other sectors is what we've been calling it.
Other sectors.
Seconded. All in favor of approving those sections as written?
Aye.
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 Bill, I see a thumb. I think we've got unanimous. Srini, you were an aye too?
yeah, aye, yeah.
Thanks. All right. No one opposed. All right. Thank you all. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is public outreach, equity evaluation, and prioritization.
I think Paul just wanted to let you guys know that those are the next steps. At the next meeting, Melanie and I are going to tee up an equity review for you. We're planning to meet with Paul to talk to him about how he wants us to think about prioritizing the actions going forward. And then, it's really, Melanie and I don't know much about the outreach a plan. That's something that Paul's gonna have to go over with you at the next meeting.
Prioritization, and Melanie, can you help us think about, I mean, I have my own ideas, but we should probably do this more scientifically. You know, if we had to put together a one pager that had the 3 or 4 most important things that we can do out of all of this, you know, the most impactful things, what would they be? I think that's really important because there's so much here. And I don't want to get the really important stuff lost in all this detail. I think that'd be a really helpful thing to do.
I would be happy to do that.
I mean, my quick answer to that, Andrew, is the science-based targets. And, you know, as a review, those are the action or the high impact actions that produce the most reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And so that is, you know, reducing vehicle miles traveled between, you know, 1% and 6% annually, either by carpooling, taking the bus, you know, using bike pedestrian infrastructure, and installing cold climate heat pumps in residential, commercial, and industrial sector, and transforming the light duty fleet to electric vehicles. I mean, those are sort of the 3.
And I do those high level, I guess, but we've set out actions that are a little more granular than what you just articulated. And I guess in my own mind, yeah, I know we want to reach those targets, but I guess in my mind, the question is which of the 3 or 4 actions, you know, would help us as, you know, most rapidly achieve those targets? And what are, if we had to pick out 3 or 4 of these actions, which are the things where you say, these are the things we really, really should get done because they're the most impactful, most likely to help us reach those targets?
And,
Yeah, so,
and
I mean,
doable in the short term.
Well, I don't know if I want to say doable. I want to first focus on these are the things we should do, and then we can figure out the obstacles.
I mean, yeah, so in my opinion, I mean, looking at the actions in the building and thermal and transportation sector that need to be implemented to support achieving those high impact actions, you know, so like a net zero building code, you know, improving the bike pedestrian infrastructure. So those specific actions within our list of actions that help to support achieving the targets.
I think to Andrew's point, a couple of things I remember from Tom's science-based assessment. He was talking about heat pump rollout and implementation. He said we needed to be at 6%. The best practice around the country is around 4%, and we are less than 2% today, the adoption. So that kind of anchoring would help people realize, you know, what does it take, you know, on the big impactful pathways.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and we went over that 2 meetings ago. And, you know, so we do have data on, you know, the number of heat pumps that need to be installed between now and 2030 to reach those targets. You know, and it's a trade-off.
Just going to the prioritization aspect of the next agenda item and just asking, we should all think about it, but you guys may be best placed to apply the science to pull out, you know, as we've just been discussing, what are the most important things that we should be, say, putting in front of the council? These are the things that really should get done.
So, Andrew, are you asking about a process that we're all going to go through in order to come up with a set of items that we all agree?
Well,
top priority?
I mean, I was simply asking Ann and Melanie to help us start that, to identify for us what they think are the most 3 or 4, maybe 5 most impactful actions to help us reach the target. We can all have our own thoughts around that too, and we'll discuss it, but as a way to tick this off.
Yeah, and we can bring those thoughts to Paul when we meet with him. I think Paul might have some ideas about how to prioritize as well. So yeah, we'll definitely put some thought into that for the next meeting.
Good. Sounds good.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
You know, the city council, no, the planning commission, isn't it? That you all got that sort of layout of how the getting feedback is going to work for getting public outreach. And they have a plan, a 2-page plan that we should all have it, not just the Planning Commission. And I guess what I was going to say is, I think they started with has the online poll started about the ARPA funding?
No, because we haven't approved. We're going to look at the revised questions on the 6th.
Okay. Because that's the methodology that at least Paul had explained. They're going to follow. So the way in which they roll out to get public feedback on ARPA priorities is the same way they're going to get feedback on the climate change suggestions of this task force, et cetera. And they have a good document. I mean, I think, excuse me, we should all have this. It's the same one they gave to the Planning Commission.
It's for gathering public input on the comprehensive plan.
Right, but the plan for doing that, they were very explicit on, they were holding up with the climate change group, doing outreach, because Paul said the senior staff was working on a methodology that would be identical for input on ARPA, input on climate task force, and input for the new comprehensive plan. It was going to be identical. So I think everybody should have a copy of this document and then take a look and see how, because, you know, we're kind of late at getting started considering our deadline for completing all of this.
Is the document that you're referring to, is it the survey itself, or there's a strategy
it's called
document?
the Public Outreach Plan. It's 2
Okay.
pages, and it's and it went to, and the Planning Commission had it for their, not last night's meeting, but the meeting before.
Can you, or
So
can someone-
it's this, I mean, I
Sure.
think that staff can send it to us.
Okay.
They've sent it to the Planning Commission.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I'd be interested to read what the overarching plan is, because the survey
Yeah.
that I saw for the ARPA feedback had explicitly listed, you know, some 15 different potential projects, and then asked 2 different ways for their feedback. And if we were to
Right.
take the identical approach here, we'd have a list of 80 some projects that were first ranked and then allocated funding
That's why
for.
we need to get started, because I think as we talk about what are the high priority things, I think we want a shorter list. Because we want people to get engaged. So we want them to say, well, I can't get an electric vehicle, but yeah, maybe I could get CBOE to come and weatherize.
Yeah,
I
we've
mean-
got to be short, 3, 4, 5 items.
Exactly. Exactly. So anyway, I would suggest to, I'm sorry, who is it who's with us? Not Bonnie.
Delilah.
Delilah.
I'm still here.
Delilah, I'm sorry. Delilah, would you get, or you know who could do it is, what's her name, who works with?
Kelsey.
That.
I've
Kelsey.
made the note that you want this document.
Kelsey will get it.
Say, tell Kelsey, we want the document that they gave to the Planning Commission when they were explaining how they would do the public outreach plan.
I've made the
for
note.
Feedback
Sounds-
on the comprehensive plan.
Sounds like we've got that taken care of. Was there anything else?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Roseanne has had a hand up for a long time.
Sure, I was assuming Roseanne was going to comment on that usually there's a period of public comment. Roseanne, was this specifically in response to something that we were talking about?
I just wanted to make some general comments before you ended the meeting. So I've been
can I-
sort of
so-
remembering things. So when you got time.
Perfect. Yes. No, I definitely saw you there, and
Okay.
I do want to give you a chance to talk, but I just wanted to ask one other question about whether there was anything that we need to know about the equity evaluation. and how that's going to roll out, if that's something we need to be doing some pre-work on.
We'll have to let you know about that. We still need to meet with Paul. We did share with you the state tool. We're going to try and tee up a process for you for the next meeting.
Thank you. Okay.
I put a link to the public outreach plan for the comp plan in the chat.
Thank
Okay, so Roseanne, now is probably a good time if you would like to make some comments.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm trying to remember some of the stuff you were talking about. So here's just some general observations I have. Way earlier in the meeting, there was a discussion, and you talked about it in previous meetings, about the phrase "if lawfully," if it's legal, or if the taking this action is okay right now legally. I just want to throw out that a lot of the legalities, the regulations and stuff, and I think Michael may have mentioned this, or one of you mentioned it, were put in place years ago. And you're talking, I think, about state statutes and state legalities. And there comes a point where, even though it may not be legal, it should be challenged so that the laws get changed. So I would encourage you to think about things that may not be legal, and maybe there aren't any, but that the law should be changed so you can do those kinds of things. So that was first a general observation. The second observation had to do with your discussion about the school. And I think, I know the leadership has changed there, but I think Helen, as the chair of the city council, well, in the old days, used to meet with the chair of the school board and had dialogues and stuff like that. So I think they would be very accommodating to those kind of overtures to, as you said, in partnership and collaboration, and we're all in this together, But one of the things that we all know is that transportation is the #1 contributor, at least in Vermont. And the school, having a husband who's a school bus driver, they have a huge footprint when it comes to transportation. And as Michael said earlier, one of the things that's, if you ever watch what happens with school buses, you see the school buses come down the street, and then you see parents chauffeuring their children in their big SUVs to the school right behind the school buses. The other thing is that they allow students to drive their cars. Other schools don't do that. I approached the principal a long time ago to say, you can just restrict them. They can't park on school grounds. So there are lots of things a school could do over transportation. I encourage you to maybe be throwing those kind of things out. And the last thing was about Andrew's idea about prioritization. You have so much in your plan that if you throw it out without some sort of big framework picture, both for the public and for the city council, I think some of it's people won't even read it. It'll get lost in the weeds. To put it in lay, simple terms, so that you do generate feedback from the public and the city council, it would be hugely beneficial. So those are my general comments. I think you're doing terrific work. I'm so proud of y'all, and happy that you're there. So.
Just a distillation would be great. Ethan, I had a question or a comment. There's a problem with audio with Andrew and Anne. And I think, from observing Andrew, when he leans forward and closer to his computer, then it gets a lot clearer. And the same might apply to Anne, but to my ear, when they're not close to their computer, it sounds like they're speaking from inside a metal garbage can. It's a little sort of an echo.
That's good to know. I know that my fan is running, and I think when it runs, it creates some distortion.
Okay. Your fan or your fan club?
It's the computer's fan. It's a really old computer, right? It's what they gave me at the CCRPC.
And then for Anne and Melanie, well, for the rest of it, it's something that I'd like us to come back to later on, and that is the idea that we in South Burlington don't charge for parking. We don't have parking meters or anything like that. But long term, I think that might be one of the ways in which we could reduce vehicle miles traveled significantly. If we didn't increase parking that's available today, and the city installed parking meters and charged for parking. Further down the road, road pricing, something we could think about. It may not be doable here in South Burlington. It's done in other cities, but I think those cities have a more highly developed road infrastructure that makes it possible for them to employ road pricing. I know it's done in Singapore and in parts of Japan. In Singapore, it covers just about every single main road, and you pay for using the road and for wearing out the road, and therefore for maintaining it. But the parking meter idea, I think, would be the one that might generate the best result for us in reduced vehicle miles traveled. It has to be coupled with an expansion of public transit, but something that we didn't put in earlier in our earlier review of the earlier work on the transportation sector, just something that I'd like us to come back to.
I just am imagining the idea of putting up toll booths or those toll, the overhead cameras that read your time. So everybody going to Burlington has to pay a toll. I love it.
Yeah.
People coming out of Burlington.
Because you have to, you from certain directions, you have to go through South Burlington to get to Burlington. So
yeah, we could make a ton of money that way. They can be embedded. They can be embedded in the road. You don't have to have that whole superstructure.
Yeah, and then Winooski and Colchester could do the same thing, and man, it would be a real revenue generator.
Okay, that's all I had to say.
I did want to ask Ethan and Andrew, in terms of the adopting similar language to Burlington about in order to enforce an energy code. I mentioned this very early on, but under the residential building energy standards, I've asked Energy Futures Group if they could incorporate into the 2023 revisions of the RBs specific steps that municipalities could take to enforce an energy code. And they thought that was a good idea. And since they are actually working for the Department of Public Service, it was actually very helpful because all the public service department people were on the call too. That they understand the municipalities are demanding a method of enforcement right now, and it's not just South Burlington. It's a lot of municipalities are looking for ways to enforce their residential building standards.
I thought, Donna, you suggested when we spoke that there was this form that builders could produce voluntarily.
There already is. There already is.
I know. I know, but I thought it was a good idea to require it. And just the act of having to fill that form out, I think, would tend to increase compliance if someone has to verify that they've done certain things and submit a form. Just that act alone, without enforcement, in my mind, might be really useful.
Yeah, I think
It
we
technically
They have to
is
fill out the
already
form. Sorry,
required.
this is Delilah.
Delilah.
Yes, they have to file the residential and the commercial building energy standard. There's a self-certification form that if they want to get for multifamily buildings in South Burlington and multifamily residential buildings and commercial new construction, if they want to get a certificate of occupancy from us.
But how about for single family?
We do not issue certificate of occupancies for single family and two family homes in South Burlington.
Right, but I guess the question is, could there be a process where the builders have to submit this form, and if they don't, something happens?
Well, they are still required to do it and put it on file with the clerk's office by the state, the way it's written in the state. We have less of a way to confirm that since we don't issue certificate of occupancies. But if they come in and ask for a certificate of compliance, we do ask for it.
So one question, I think Andrew may have brought this up. Doesn't every single family house have to have an electrical inspection before it can be occupied?
No,
I don't
No.
think so.
no,
Oh, so there's,
No.
so this is a
not a single
problem.
family.
So I think one of the things that Montpelier kind of brought this up, the people from Montpelier, that you do need to have certificate of occupancy requirements for everything, for residential as well. And so I think we need to really investigate, or the city needs to investigate what it would take to just implement that, requiring, because other municipalities do have COs, certificates of occupancy for residential. And that is the key to making sure that you get the certifications filed.
Right.
Because you can withhold something if you don't get it. So who can start implementing that?
Isn't that part of Burlington's new fossil heating standard ordinance, that if you want, you don't get a certificate of occupancy until you've complied with these new rules? Am I correct about that, Andrew?
I think the difference is
Remember
that
that part of it, but you may be right. I just don't clearly recall that.
Regarding the energy certification that comes with the RBs and CBs, Burlington does have building codes and a building permit process. So even prior to their charter change and the new law that they enacted about renewable energy furnaces, they were requiring the self-certification for single-family homes prior to issuing a certificate of occupancy / building permit.
Yeah, so if you don't have a certificate of occupancy, you don't have anything to hold somebody to.
Right.
And
They
apparently,
have a pretty significant enforcement office, though. I can't remember how, because we've talked about this at the council.
yeah,
Yeah.
but just
level.
getting a builder to turn over a piece of paper will require, the city requiring a CO.
Didn't Delilah just say that?
Yeah, it's the
filed with the
enforcement
state?
piece that is.
It requires more than just myself.
I just pulled up the ordinance. It says to get a permit. I don't know if that's the same thing as a CO, but to get a permit,
Nope,
you have to prove they've satisfied the ordinance.
nope. Permits is gotten before you even start construction.
Applicants seeking permits for all new buildings to demonstrate the new building will utilize a renewable primary heating system. That's what the ordinance says.
Yeah.
Well, that's the ordinance for the heating system.
That's
And
what
you
we're
can-
talking about.
And you can require that, but if you don't have this, if you don't have a C of O, you have no way of doing verification.
I'm just addressing Michael's question in terms of what the Burlington ordinance said.
Right, and at the city council level, it always comes back to enforcement. And that would take a number of people that we don't have right now. So it's doable.
Oh, no, yeah, there's different interpretations of this. And having been involved in RBs for as long as I've been in Vermont, this has always been an issue of, you write the code, but, enforcement is, maybe, you don't really have any real knowledge of, until you look, 2 or 3 years later and find out through survey what's actually happened. What you're saying here is not that you have to have somebody go out and do an inspection, just that if you have a certificate of occupancy, that you can demand that something be filed by the builder. It's a self-certification as it is now, but at least you get the certificate from the builder before you give them a C of O. And right now, nobody's doing inspection. Even at that point, there wouldn't be any inspection. A further step would be, you know, if the city were to hire spot inspections, you know, hire somebody to do spot inspections. You can also hire someone called a home energy rater. These people already exist, they're contractors. You can have someone do a home energy rating on a spot basis just to make sure that the certificates are accurate. So nobody goes to the site, you don't have to hire anybody. It's just a matter of a requirement that, you know, that you have control over whether someone can occupy that space. And
So can I make a, I'm sorry.
and
I'm
just so
sorry.
you know, South Burlington would not be alone in requiring this. There are a number of municipalities that already have this requirement for single family homes.
So if I can make a suggestion, Donna, I think this is all useful information, and I wonder if it would be easier for people to digest if we worked with you to incorporate some of these details into, I mean, we had some information that I circulated around from what we learned from Burlington. We're now getting some more information that Paul's working on getting from the city lawyer to find out about taking the next steps. Maybe you could work with, well, I
I'll
guess you
find
can't
out
directly
what-
work with me and Andrew and Michael, because then we'd be quorum.
Sure.
But
Yeah, and I'll
if you
find
can
out
maybe
what
contribute-
Montpelier has. I'll find out what Montpelier has done, because I think theirs may apply to existing homes as well as new ones.
Yeah, I mean, I
It may
feel like
be pretty extensive.
there's a number of different components here, and I think it'd be really helpful to try to lay out in a document, you know, what's happening now, what could happen, what would the consequences be, what would it take,
Yeah.
so that everyone could understand what we want to recommend to city council.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't trying to resolve this tonight. I just wanted people to understand that we weren't talking about hiring inspectors.
I've got to get off because my
Yep.
dogs are needing to
Yes.
go out. Sorry.
I was gonna to move to adjourn since we're 10 minutes after, if everyone is has said their piece.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I
you.
agree.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.